Perfect. Okay, so now let's dive into today's session. My name is Jamili Baroud. I am a curriculum and evaluation consultant at LDDI. And with me today is my colleague Sarah Gong, learning designer, and Gabrielle Coombs, also a learning designer. And together we'll be facilitating today's session. So our Viewpoints event encourages faculty, students, and staff to engage with relevant topics that raise pedagogical questions and can be viewed from various perspectives. And we hope this space and time provokes deeper thinking about how technology is inspiring or reshaping the way that we approach AI in education.
Okay, before we introduce our panelists, we would like to acknowledge that UBC and UBC servers that we are using for this virtual session today are located on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I would also like to recognize the deep loss of indigenous lands and the decrease in environmental health caused by colonization and further amplified by emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. May this acknowledgement inspire reflection and action towards reconciliation and environmental sustainability as we honor ongoing efforts to preserve and revitalize the planet. Okay, now let's introduce our four incredible panelists that we have today. It is our pleasure to welcome Dr. Rowan Darvin. Dr. Darvin is an assistant professor in the Department of Language and Literacy Education at UBC Vancouver campus. His research examines issues of critical digital literacies, generative AI, equity, and identity. He has conducted multiple professional development workshops for various school districts in BC on the implications of generative AI for learning. And he has published articles on generative AI in Computers in Human Behavior, Computer-Assisted Language Learning, and Journal of Second Language Writing. Welcome, Dr. Darvin.
Thanks for having me.
We also have with us today Dr. Danny Bakan, who teaches teachers about music and the arts, and he teaches musicians and artists about teaching. So Danny joined the Faculty of Education at UBC in 2017 as a lecturer in the Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy. In addition to his work in higher education and schools, Danny is an established musician, composer, and theater artist whose artistic portfolio includes several CDs, performances across North America, theatrical productions, dance scores, children's musicals, and appearances on CBC, syndicated US radio, and NPR. So welcome, Danny.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
We also have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Sonya Woloshen, who has over 15 years of experience in education, including K-12, French immersion, and roles with the Ministry of Education. Her research focuses on learning analytics and artificial intelligence, and she has dedicated to creating anti-oppressive learning environments. Dr. Woloshen is the new Learning Design Program Manager in the Teacher Education Office at the UBC Vancouver campus, helping learners and faculty integrate digital literacies and competencies into their pedagogical practices. Welcome, Sonya.
Thank you so much for having me.
And our next and final panelist is Mike Elkoussy, an adult ELL teacher with over 19 years experience. Mike has spent the last 15 years running his own school, A+ English, which is focused on helping adults increase their fluency in speaking skills. Currently, he's completing a Bachelor of Education at UBC as part of his transition from teaching adults to teaching children. Mike's focus has always been on using digital tools to help students improve quickly and efficiently. And he has an extensive background in using AI for lesson creation, adaptations, curricular modifications, and gamifications. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And in today's session, we will ask each of our panelists to take a few minutes to share their viewpoints on AI and human creativity in learning. And then we will open the floor for a general discussion and any questions, comments you have. And throughout the session, you are invited to post any comments and questions in the chat at any time. So with that, I will pass it over to Dr. Rowan Darvin to share a bit more about their work and perspectives. And welcome, Dr. Darvin.
All right, thanks for having me. So maybe I'd start by talking about kind of like the question that this particular panel is focusing on, that is really looking at talking about blending AI and human creativity, right? And for me, when I think about creativity and how we conceptualize it, whether we link it to ideas about originality or being able to assemble things together in ways that represent one's identity, I think what's critical to understand, just for us to be able to have engaging conversation about this topic, is that, well, it's true when we think about generative AI, it really changes the game, right? When we talk about these disruptive technologies in the past 20 or 30 years, while Google was there to be able to retrieve information online, social media help disseminate information. Generative AI is really about creation. That is the fact that it is generative, is that it's able to create new things, right? And I say new in quotation marks, really, because as we understand also that while it is, well, OpenAI will say it's become omnimodal, right? That it's able to draw on these different modes of representation. But at the same time, we know that it's based on statistical models of language, right, of images. So when we speak of large language models or large vision models being statistical, being predictive, really based on existing data, the question then is, can we really say that something that comes out of generative AI is creative in that sense, right? In fact, Rodney Jones would argue that everything that comes out of these tools are stereotypical, right? They are stereotypes because they are based on statistical probabilities of what appears in discourses out there. And so I think the question then that we'll have to ask is, if we understand that the stuff that generative AI creates, generates, provides us, are really based on already existing things out there with ideologies embedded in them, with certain ways of thinking about the world, right, that can be replicated. What does it really mean then to be able to use these tools in ways that really do allow learners to create something new? And so I think critical to understanding this is to really break down the different functionalities even further. We know that when we speak of generative AI, while they generate new images, they can be compositional, whether it's composing essays or creating images or producing code. Some are more informational, where you provide definitions, explanations, or translations. They could be modificative in terms of editing, summarizing, simulative, and also elicitative, right? So simulating human conversation in specific contexts, and elicitative in the way that they help us brainstorm or walk us through certain ways of thinking. And so I thought I'd mention that as we engage in conversation about human creativity, right? That when we think about these tools, there are many different ways in which we engage with these tools that reflect different levels of agency that are able to, that enable different ways of creativity. And especially recognizing again that because the content that's provided to us is ideological, they represent kind of ideas that have been out there. How then do we make sure that learners are able to interrogate the content generated by these tools so that we don't end up regurgitating what's already out there, and hence be able to engage in true creativity?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ron, for sharing your thoughts. And at this point, we'd like to invite Dr. Danny Bakan to share your thoughts about AI and human creativity. Take it away, Dan.
Thank you. My thoughts, so many thoughts. How do we deal with this moment in history? You know, how do we work with this moment where we are in this cascading and increasingly world of technology changing around us, and we're swimming within the soup. So I when I was asked to do this panel, I hesitated a little bit because I thought a great deal about creativity and technology, but AI is a new beast. It changes things. So if I just sort of go back to some of my thinking, I sort of go back to fundamentals and sort of take a meta historical lens at this a little bit. And I'm reminded of how the piano changed history, the music history, when the piano was invented. And there was a resistance to the piano, and there was discussions as to whether the harpsichord was better than the clavichord, which was better than the piano. And this technology was seen as this change, but it changed the way music was generated. So music that came out after the invention of the piano changed because of the piano itself. And throughout history with music, technology has been connected to it. So when the invention of brass instruments, and certainly with the invention of recording, which really transformed everything when we started to record music. And this increased to when they started to record music digitally, which I was of the generation which started out recording analog on tape. And by the time I was producing a lot of music, I was recording digitally. Now, that led to GarageBand, right? Which was in some ways, the early AI of music, where you started to have these loops and these generated loops, and you could put them together and assemble them together. And even now, if you go to GarageBand and you punch in a certain musical style, it will assemble different loops of music and put it together in a way that sounds to us very aesthetically pleasing. So I'm very sort of intrigued by this connection between AI and creativity, and I've been playing with it a little bit, and I'm going to share some of that with you in a couple of minutes after I make some introductory remarks. So when I think about education and learning, and I go back to some basics, and for me, I go back to my mentor William Pinar, and I think about, you know, his great question of curriculum theory is, what is the most important things that our generation has to share for the future generation? And when I look at something like generative AI, which is going to change things so dramatically, and which is being sold to us unquestioningly, and it's being rolled into everything we're doing. And I look at the kids and say, okay, how are we going to prepare them for a world of generative AI? And what are the appropriate skills? So for instance, when GarageBand came in, we had a lot of discussion as to whether music notation is an appropriate thing to keep teaching. When it's all drag and drop and waveforms, maybe music notation is from the 18th century and from music from before, and the new music that's being produced is not using that. Now we start looking at AI music production. I'm asking questions like, well, what is the role of the musician in this? Where is the human hand of it? And to that end, I think back, before I go there, I'll think back about things like the electric guitar and how that changed music, and what Jimi Hendrix did with the electric guitar that changed so much, and how it came out of the blues and transformed it. And I trust that the creativity of our society is going to do the same thing with AI. I trust that those creators are going to come in, those kids who are fluent in it in a way that I'm not fluent in it, and be able to work the AI in such a way to make it explode. And then I say, maybe, because we're in times I don't know what to expect. So if I ask this question, what do they need to know? And we ask this question as music educators. Do the kids still need to know how to read music? Do the kids still need to know these other things if we're working with GarageBand? So when we move forward, I'm not sure. So let me show you a software which I'm playing with called, hold on, I'll just open it here and make sure you can see it. There, you should be able to see it. This is called Suno, and this is a AI song generating software. Yesterday, or actually it was May 7th, I put in, write me a song about the dangers of using AI in arts education. and it produced the song that I'm about to share with you now. And the words are here, and there's two different versions. Can you see that all right, Jamily? Okay, and just give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. Okay, I'm gonna start. Let me see if I can get playing at the beginning here. I'll take it right back to the beginning. I might stop and skip ahead a little bit.
I asked the screen to answer my call. A hollow voice whispered faint and small. No soul behind those flickering eyes, just patterns dressed in a clever disguise. Chalkboards faded now, glowing screens cry. They teach me numbers but never the why. Hands don't write words, just keys that I tap. Knowledge reduced to a lifeless map. Oh, we built a ghost and gave it our trust, a mirror of us that crumbles to dust, the heart of learning buried in stone. Cut off the roots, now the seeds won't grow.
So can you hear me while I talk over it? Yes. It produced this in about 15 seconds.
The heart of learning buried in stone. Cut off the roots, now the seeds won't grow.
I'm just going to pause it for a minute. And I'm going to show you. So that was one version. It gave me two versions. So that was Echo of the Circle one. There's another one here. Which
I asked the screen to answer my call. A hollow voice whispered faint and small. No soul behind those flickering eyes, just patterns dressed in a clever disguise. Chalkboards faded now, glowing screens cry. They teach me numbers but never the why. Hands don't
I want to skip to the chorus because it's good. Just wait for that.
Knowledge reduced to a lifeless map. Oh, we built a ghost and gave it our trust, a mirror of us that crumbles to dust, the heart of learning buried in stone. Cut off the roots, now the seeds won't grow.
I'll stop it there. Okay, so it's so easy, it's ridiculous, it's seductive, it's sexy, you want to do it, and I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it's good. You know, it's radio ready. It's, you know, I do know of teachers. There's a teacher I know who's using this software to write theme songs for every kid in his class, right? He's punching in all the kids' favorite activities, etc. It crunches out the song. I can do it as hip hop. I can do it in all different styles. So I'm puzzled by this, right? By AI in general, but I also do trust human creativity. And I do trust that human spirit can use whatever tools it gets and turn it into something which is gold. Right now, it's seductive and it's candy and it looks like something and you can see through it, right? As I work with the lyrics more and more, and I can start to see how it does analogy really well. It does metaphors really well, similes really well. It just collides things in amazing ways that I wouldn't think of. And it's stunning and it's somehow offensive. So in this moment of history where I sit here in the Matrix, right, looking at all of this, where I was seduced by digital technology, I used digital technology, I love digital technology. Now I'm confronted with this, and I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know how to prepare the kids for it. And that's the question in my mind. I also know that it is being sold to us like crazy. In the last 2 years, everything we have, it's being wrapped into it, and you can't get away from it. I also know there's questions in my mind as a teacher about the value of people being able to write an essay, you know, and being able to do that as opposed to, you know, I love taking a complicated thing I'm trying to write and putting into ChatGPT and say, simplify this for me and make it clearer. And that's great, right? But it's bring up these very, very difficult problems, and I may even be too old to solve them. And I think that's what I have to say for now without looking at my notes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Danny, so much. And thank you for showing the software with us and sharing the 2 pieces of music created by AI. And that was very interesting. Okay, next we will invite Dr. Sonya Woloshen to share her perspective with us. Welcome, Dr. Woloshen.
Oh, thank you so much. Sorry, we had an event. That's why I'm casually dressed. And Danny, your descriptions are my absolute favorite. So I'm not as eloquent as that. So, but thank you for showing us the way. Yeah, so I'm a learning design manager here in the teacher education program. So I work with students in the Bachelor of Education. And my sort of work within AI. I come from a learning analytics background, very data driven, and then AI just kind of sprung up on me. And what I try to do is I'm trying to learn all of the tools because I do have students in the BEd program coming to me. I do, Mike, yeah, not Mike. Mike already has a lot of expertise. But I have the instructors, I have school advisors reaching out. I've had other institutions, UVic, University of Winnipeg. I showed two folks from Vancouver Island University about what it could do because these folks had never realized that their students might be using it in their teacher education program, and I showed them how quickly it could create a lesson plan. So one was happy about this, the other was not. So I find when I do talk to folks, I am trying to learn as much as I can to know appropriate uses, how it's being used in schools, in universities. And I try and show me, I'm neither for nor against. It's just, it is here. When I started my teaching career in 2008, we said very similar things to the cell phone. And I remember everyone had flip phones and they could text. And I remember there being a cell phone ban. It was in all the school agendas. And it was like, students are going to lose how to spell. They're never going to need a calculator, you know? And so some of this is true and some of it isn't. And it's just reminding me of that time. And at that time, we didn't get on board with the phones as educators as quickly as the learners were. So I'm feeling like this is an opportunity that if we learn alongside, we can help to guide them, particularly in the K-12 area. And because I've actually been canvassing a few faculties here at UBC, science 1, forestry, medicine. And what they are finding is that it's very time consuming when they do suspect AI use. And then they have to have conversations with the students and decipher. And what they're finding is they wished there was an intro to AI course for students entering university from high school, because it's not being taught across the board in high schools yet. And students, when they talk to them in first year or second year, the students are stating, I didn't know that it was not okay to copy and paste something from AI. I did not know. So they're wanting sort of that practicality of the ethical uses, if there are any, what would be considered academic misconduct with respect to AI use in university programs, what would be, intellectual property, all of these kinds of topics. So I'm just being so open. I'm trying all the things. I'm learning new tools to be able to help others because they do come to me. One area that I've really started to focus is anti-oppressive uses of AI. So I'm non-Indigenous, I'm not a person of color. I don't live the same experiences as others do. So for me personally, as an educator, I try to review my materials that I might be publishing or posting, and I try and show teacher candidates in the Bachelor of Education program that some of these tools are quite strong, depending on the prompting that you're using, to be able to review material, point out areas that need to be modified, and provide explanations. And so it's just a very unique way to sort of look at AI use. One other perspective is I teach languages, French. And so I know that with image creation, very hot topic, I know Ron mentioned it in the beginning as well, But for accessibility of these texts, teaching French immersion, I just think back to all of those years of my students reading 18th century French works when their language level is not at that level. And maybe an image would have been great. It's difficult to hire the artist to create the images for these. Those authors have deceased hundreds of years ago. So I think about how AI could have been used in my teaching career when I was in high school, and just creating some accessibility features, looking at this anti-oppressive, what perspectives are missing in this post, what perspectives could be added. We've even taken some of the documentation here at the Teacher Education Office and asked it to review. What are we missing? Who is not being represented here? And so like I said in the beginning, I'm trying to learn all of the things to help figure out what it's doing, because it's moving at such a fast pace and people are just unaware, not sure what to do. And I'm trying my best to navigate and help them. But yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and experiences with us. Thank you. Last, we'd like to invite Mike Elkoussy to the floor. Take it away, Mike.
Thank you. I'm just going to start by sharing my screen. Let me know if you can see it okay. Good. Okay. I'm going to take a completely different tactic than my colleagues here on the panel. I'm going to begin at the dentist. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So last time I went to the dentist, I had to get a tooth extracted. And I remember like coming out of the chair and feeling really groggy, feeling really numb. My mouth was all swollen. And I walked up to the counter, and the MOA said to me, okay, we don't need to follow up, but we should book a 6-month. Do you want to do it? And I said like, yeah, okay. And she's like, okay, how about November? And I didn't have my phone because it was back in my jacket. The jacket was over the chair. I was so out of it. And then she kind of like looked at me and said like, so can we book it? And I'm like, I'm not exactly sure. I don't have my device with me. And it kind of started this idea with me of like a thought experiment where you're at the dentist, you're numb, you want to leave. She's waiting to book the appointment, for example. And I imagined like in this hypothetical scenario, you finish work at noon, you live in Kits, your dentist appointment is in Yaletown at 1:30, 6 months from now. Let's imagine you're going to take the bus and you're picking up your kids from school at 3:05, not 3 o'clock. That's too early, and not 3:10. 5 minutes late, you're going to be seen as an absentee parent. This person is waiting, and now she's getting more impatient. How do you figure this out without technology? And so it kind of sparked this idea in my head where it's like, what do you do? And what did people do in the past? You could just book it, right? Figure out the time it'll take you to get from your home in Kits to Yaletown. Keep in mind the length of the appointment, build in some time just in case they're running behind as they usually are. Calculate the travel time, or thinking about what people did before smartphones. Remember the TransLink paper maps? If you did when I first moved to Vancouver, like 20 years ago, they had paper maps with schedules that you could pull out and see like that the beeline goes every 9 minutes or whatever it is like that. But you got to keep in mind that the schedules changed. There was like a winter and a summer one. There's Pro D days, so all of these things like that. So the point I'm trying to make with this is that there are tools to use. Why not use the tools that they're there? Every profession uses tools. We've got, for example, like the plumber has tools and the engineer has tools. Teachers need tools, and maybe AI should just be one of those tools, one amongst many. The idea basically is that these tools will lighten our cognitive load so we can focus on the higher order thinking and have these tools do kind of the grunt work. So with that in mind, in my background super quickly, I opened my company A+ English back in 2009, teaching like speaking to adult language learners. We started in a really small room inside a bridal studio, and then we grew to at our biggest size. We had locations in Vancouver and then Tokyo. We were the first school in the world to use iPads, and I know this because we bought them on launch day. We drove down to get them. We had them implemented in our class that afternoon. You can look at this one that we've got from the very first generation and look at the bezels on it. Look how thick it is like that. I still have it. It still works. So our classes were structured as a teacher, 4 students, and a topic, kind of like this. We're on Zoom now since COVID. We had a shared set of notes and a master list of mistakes. So a student would say he played guitar, would say, no, he plays guitar. So we'd correct them like that. So part of what we're doing this is we looked at this as, for one, how do we make our classes more efficient as time goes on? We have an hour with these students. How do we fully maximize that hour so that they're speaking and getting corrected and improving their English? During the BEd, which is what I'm currently doing here at UBC, I came across this quote, which is about the growth mindset, and it's from Doug Lemoff about teach it like a champion. It says, the goal in teaching is to get the shortest path from A, lack of knowledge and understanding, to B, durable long-term knowledge and understanding. So the primary criterion for evaluating lessons should always be, how quickly does it get me there? Put another way, if we've got A to B and there's all these other different ways that we could teach something, what's the fastest way to get from A to B? And in our case, it was A is the current English speaking level, and B would be higher English speaking level. How would they improve? One way that we did this is we would define vocabulary. So I took this from one of my teacher's notes from yesterday. They were discussing shopping. Someone was talking about star ratings on Amazon. That when I'm shopping on Amazon, I never know which item to buy. I'm so bad at decisions. There's nothing wrong with that sentence, but if we want to improve their fluency, we'd switch out a word and say, okay, well, maybe we'd say indecisive. So back in the day, we would type the word indecisive, mark the part of speech, put a definition and some example sentences so they could learn and practice on their own. Then when we implemented the OpenAI API, it all changed. So we could type in the word indecisive, boom, this was done instantly. Boom, the definition was done instantly. It would give us an example usage, subject, verb, indecisively, plus the rest of the sentence. And then it would give us an example sentence that was contextually related to our topic. So in this case, they were discussing travel, and then takes indecisively, connects it to the topic travel, and some collocations for later. So it used to take us 3 minutes per class, now it takes us 3 seconds. So take that, and writ large, that's a lot of time that's saved. And also, it's a lot of time the students will then have to practice their speaking. Instead of watching us type, they're then moving on with the topic and practicing their speaking more and more. So like any new implementation, it went down, and it went down hard. We implemented this on a Monday, and then it crashed almost right away. And how do we know it crashed? Because our support tickets went up instantly. Like any business, there's a billion different parts that are moving. Sometimes something would break on Monday. We wouldn't know till like Wednesday. We heard instantly because the tickets went up, 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 up. And our students, our teachers had said this. On Monday, we introed it, and they're like, this is going to take my job. I don't like this tool. By Thursday, they were like, oh my God, how soon can you get this up and running again? I need this. So within 3 days, it had become a mission critical tool. And of all the ed tech that we ever tried, and we've tried almost everything, nothing had become mission critical that quickly, and had been so valuable that now if it goes down, we hear about it instantly. So turning to practicum, which I just finished at Sir Winston Churchill in Vancouver, I found it to be an incredibly challenging experience despite my 19 years in the classroom, because you're trying to balance everybody's happiness. Students want engaging lessons. Professors want to make sure that you're touching on the pedagogy and the theory that they've been doing. School advisors, it's their classroom, so they want to make sure that you're following their rules and their culture. Admin has to follow all the little fiddly rules that every single school board has, and they're all different. And then we're balancing work and life, and it's so tough. And by halfway through practicum, I kind of snapped. And then I was like, maybe there's a way I can incorporate AI into my practice. So AI to lighten the load. 2 features came out, one right before and one right in the middle of my practicum, which saved so much time. First one is projects in ChatGPT, which is in December. And the other one was exactly a month ago, where the memory feature changed, where before you used to have to explicitly say, please remember that I'm a teacher. Now it remembers that by default, and you can always forget it if you want to for privacy reasons. So how I used it was essentially this. If I was planning out a lesson and then a unit first and then a lesson attached to that, I would do a lesson for one, for example, project for each class. So I did one on unit planning for English 10. Then I would say explicitly what I was. I'm a teacher on practicum at SWC in Vancouver, teaching Lit Studies 10. This is a link to the curriculum. I want everything to have an experiential hook, be differentiated, FPPL elements, which I want to observe before they're incorporated to make sure they're appropriate. 60 to 80 minutes in length is what I'm looking for. And then each chat within the project was a day. So I had a unit plan for the first one, a day 3 lesson, didn't go well, so I redid it for the following class. Intro writing plan, another one, writing structure, conclusions. So each one of these is a chat within it. Then I could come up with experiential hooks. So I said, how about one for like resource scarcity in writing, because we were doing the Lorax. So for example, I generated trees, stuck them all around the classroom, and the trees would beg for their life and say, please don't chop me down. In the case of this one, I'm infested with an invasive species that could spread to the forest, but please don't cut me down. And then every student had a chainsaw. And they went around with the chainsaws. And this one said, I need to clear space for a shopping mall. Or one said, we need a new Starbucks. And another one said, oh, we need supportive housing for single parents. So to go around the room and then use their speaking to justify which one they're cutting down. And the prompt I used was here. Then to make sure there's differentiation and to support UDL, help me come up with some sentence starters. So then it would say, here's some for strong justification. Here's some for counter arguments. That's what I used. Then rubrics and checklists. So I said here, the prompt, you can see it create rubrics for me and create a checklist. And so it did this on its own. Choose one tree you want to chop down and justify the reason why. So instead of spending my time on the little minutia of the rubrics, which drives me insane, it could just be done. I'm checking it to make sure it's okay. I'm checking it to make sure it's hitting the core competencies that I need to teach and that my professors are looking for. But more importantly, it's just done that I can assess it and make sure it's okay. So I'm doing the higher order thinking while this is getting rid of the grunt work. Then exemplars. And this one is the one that blew my mind. As any writer knows, your conclusion typically mirrors your intro. So for the conclusion lesson, I said, well, write me an intro. And so it did with an intro paragraph, and it wrote this background info. At Sir Winston Churchill Secondary, the 8:40 start time forces students to wake up before their brains are fully alert. I had to check this. I didn't know what time classes started at this school because I didn't teach first block, and it had done that work for me. So just one little thing, it knocks off. Every little thing it's knocking off, the more time I have for other stuff. Then accessibility came. So I said, for example, transcribe this audio, add in a line break, and output a downloadable Word doc. This was for a student with an IEP who had trouble writing and wanted to do an oral reflection. I had an ELL student who had some massive fundamental fossilized errors and said, okay, I anonymized it. I took out their name completely, took a photograph and said, assess it for fossilized errors, and I made a worksheet. Another one for someone who had comprehension challenge. I had an open text that I could use, so I graded the language down. All of this took less time than would have taken me even 6 months ago because these tools are there and able to use. So basically, my cognitive load became so much lighter. I'm not thinking about checklists or exemplars or continuously contextualizing my example sentences to be relevant to my English 10 students because it knows where I am. And instead, I am thinking about these things, the things that I think are way more important, of like which hooks are going to work, what's pedagogically sound, what will work for my specific classroom, and basically the fastest way to get from A to B. And again, how wild this whole thing is. I generated these images yesterday. These are the texts I did. I didn't ask it to do this, but it knows, for example, if I can zoom in slightly, it knows that I did the Marrow Thieves. It knows that I did Animal Farm. It knows I did a lesson on perspective, and it knows that I'm an IB MYP teacher. So my unit planning was based on that. So somehow it still remembered all of that from the memory, and it's put it into a thing. And also it knows that I'm here in Vancouver, which again is super wild to me. So now imagine we're back at the dentist. You got two options, right? Now the dentist is waiting for you, and you can either grab your phone, open the calendar, check out maps. Yeah, I can book that. 6 months in the future, you write it down and you're done. Or option two, we know what that looks like. So I would imagine in that case that you're choosing to lighten your cognitive load. And I would imagine that that's what we should be doing in the future. So I bet you choose to focus on the more important things in life. And I honestly think that teachers should do the same. Let AI do the heavy lifting, let AI do the grunt work, and find one way that you can lighten your own cognitive load so that you can focus on the important stuff, which is helping your students improve as fast as they can. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Wow, those were some incredibly diverse and creative, if I may, approaches to AI in teaching and learning. And I just want to thank all of our wonderful panelists for sharing your very unique perspectives and approaches. Your discussions were enlightening and brought forth plenty of new and transformational ideas, but also critical approaches to AI as creative pedagogy. So thank you. And at this point, we will be inviting everyone here to ask questions or add to the conversation. So if you prefer to use the chat, please feel free to use the chat for your questions and comments, and we'll keep an eye on it. But otherwise, you can kind of raise your hand or just unmute yourself and go ahead with your questions and comments. Hi, Ron.
Yes. I just want to say thanks, Mike, for that wonderful example. I think it really drives home exactly what I was trying to point out earlier as well, that I'm all for lightening the cognitive load for sure. And I think what you've demonstrated is that there are tasks that generative AI can do that are kind of stuff that the teacher can easily kind of distribute so that it makes space, as you said, to be able to work on more creative things, right? And to think about what would make it really appropriate for the classroom. And I think that's really at the heart of what I was trying to point out earlier also when I said we then have to take a look at the functionalities that are available to see, like if we're saying we're gonna help or let students use AI, is to understand which particular functionalities are relevant for a particular task. And we talk about kind of like schools talk about, oh, what should our stance be in terms of kind of policies with regard to do we let in kind of like the use of AI in the classroom? I would say really it has to be kind of really focus on the task and the learning objectives that you have for each task as well to be able to determine what would be a good way that will still enable human creativity, right? The learner creativity. And so like Danny's example of a song, kind of like generating a song, the question is like, which part of creation do you want students to focus on so that the tool assists rather than takes over the task, right? I've conducted research with secondary schools here in DC, and I had one student, for instance, he was writing his own choose your own adventure story, and he wanted to do it online, and so because his focus was on writing the story, what he would do is he would plug in the story that he had written and ask for prompts to generate images that would match the story. Because in that case, his objective is really to write the story, his own, and the images were there. He's not an artist. It wasn't, he's not expecting to create images of his own. It's there to assist the writing process. And that's where I think we're able to maintain human agency and creativity when we look at a particular task and say, where is it that these tools can assist? And how can we ensure that the student is achieving particular learning objectives, and at the same time, achieving in a way that is enhanced by rather than taken over by the tool.
Thanks, Ron. I'll invite the panelists to respond and anyone in the.
Well, I can just add I can add to that. Mike, that was great because you showed me a way to do it that I hadn't thought of before, right? And it makes that made a lot more sense to me. And in terms of the song generation, like I'm sort of looking at the third of the, okay, it can do this. Okay, I know it can write poems. As an arts educator, I'm looking at that. But the idea of becoming fluent enough in it that it can do the mundane for you, right? Which I think is the potential for it to alleviate that stress from our lives is interesting to me. And I'm not quite sure I am, at 64 years old, am fluent enough to get there, right? But seeing, when I look at digital natives are growing up with this, they have a sort of different relationship to it. And I do think that that the creativity is in the prompts, right? It's really, and I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of poetic use. I teach a course in digital media and arts education, and we take a makerspace approach to it where we have students basically generate digital products every week. And we did, Jamalee and I actually together did a 2-week making session with AI. And I just basically introduced them to AI tools. And I said, okay, just go do something, right? Do something with them. And, it went from everything from one person had the AI schedule their day and did everything the AI recommended to them doing very complicated digital editing and then bringing in AI images into the digital editing. So adding them to their other projects and things like that, which I think is another way I think it's incredibly useful, is that if you're working on, using those tools to add into your work. But I think it's something, I think generally we've talked about this before, about having the human in the room, like having somebody at the wheel, who is doing that executive function work. And as you say, so that it can do that other stuff. When I look at something like, GarageBand or Suno or any of those things, I ask a whole other series of questions about, as a music educator, like does it mean to make music in this moment, and how do we approach it? And that's where I did there was a chat comment way back when, makes me wonder if this is Faiza, if future generations growing up in generative AI will engage in it in ways the creators never envisioned. And the answer is yes, of course. It's gonna, in the same way, I don't think, I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have the internet, and this is not something we sort of envisioned it a little bit in science fiction here and there. We had this idea, but as it emerged and then the realities of it, to get to the point where I can, meet with you all on Zoom and do this, like Star Trek, we're right in the soup. One thing I just want to add into this a little bit for me about the way I think of this is I take a media theory approach sometimes. I think about, they say history, well, it's falsely attributed to Mark Twain that history doesn't repeat itself, but often rhymes. And I do think that we can look back at the printing press and what happened when the printing press came into the world and how it changed everything. And we can sort of see correlations in terms of what we're experiencing now in this moment, in terms of how things are changing. And there's a very good article by Collins and Halverson about schooling, and where schooling during the whole school institution, the bricks and mortar institution as we know it, is based on the concept of the library, based on the concept of the printing press, based on the concept that the books are in one place, and that we have to put it in the knowledge into our heads because the books stay in the library and we go out into the world. And how digital changes that, where it brings all the information to us all the time. Now, the next question is, what about generative AI? And how does that fit into what we think of learning and schooling is, and how do we envision schooling in 20 or 30 years with these tools? And I don't have the answers, but I just wanted to comment that I did appreciate, Mike, how you did that. And Ron, I appreciate your remarks. And Sonya, always lovely to talk. Sonya and I have talked together before, and I always learn from you. So thank you. And I too, Sonya, am struggling along with it, trying to figure it out as we go along.
I just wanted to respond and say thank you, Danny, also for the audio. I didn't know of that tool. I also wonder, like, as an educator, if there's a way to use that as a way of showing what is and isn't acceptable. So, in the lessons that I had to do on practicum, we were always using a core competency that I would screenshot and post up on the board and say, this is why we're doing this today. And so I could say, like, hey, we can use generative AI to take a look at, for example, the topic sentences that we're working on. I can't assess 28 topic sentences simultaneously, so let's use this tool, and this is and isn't acceptable. So Danny, do you see a way of being like able to use that in the future, of saying like, generate lyrics but not music, or generate music but not lyrics, and if there's value in that, or is the whole thing just not at all useful?
Well, I can't even really go into that paradigm somehow, because I don't use that kind of evaluative methods when looking at things like this. I think of it more in, that's why the makerspace model was more useful to me, right? The idea of make whatever you want, use the tools as you want, but take responsibility for using the tools. And I think one of the things, Gemily, we've talked about this a few times, that one of the things I want to start building into my assignments is an AI questionnaire that they have to fill out as they turn in their assignment. That if they use spell check, I want to know. If they use ChatGPT, I want to know. Like, so basically they take responsibility for the use of it. And I think that might be one of the ways through that, is that they can use for lyrics. Some kids are going to want to use it for lyrics, some are going to want to use it for music. They'll do other stuff, right? But the idea that they take responsibility for it and they use it mindfully might be one of the ways to move forward, at least in this moment in time, while we're sort of struggling about figuring it all out. And of course, there's huge issues around copyright, which I know somebody asked that question, the copyright, intellectual property, and I'm not a lawyer. I can't really speak to any of that, but yeah.
Thank you, Ron. I know you had something to say, but I do notice there's a question in the chat. Do you want to jump in first and we'll get to the
I actually
question?
want to respond to the two questions.
Oh, amazing. Okay,
and
take it
something
away.
that Danny touched on, because I see Faisa was saying, creators will never know kind of like what generative AI will lead to. And it's true even when it comes to the output that's created, even though they may have come up with the algorithms, right, that are meant to generate these texts. I don't know if you recall early last year, for instance, where Google had to take down Gemini for like a couple of days because people were posting pictures of how they were asking for images of founding fathers of the United States, and they were showing racially diverse founding fathers. They were showing pictures of female popes, and Gemini had to take it down. And we know this because the developers inserted an algorithm that wanted diversity of representation, but in a sense, it overcompensated by then generating historically inaccurate images. So I think that's one thing we need to consider here, that once the developer constructs algorithms, how the machine interprets it and generates things is not even completely predictable either, right? Because it's always testing against each other, the different results, right? To the question of kind of like, what does it mean now when students kind of using AI to cheat? I think the the issue here is that when we think about these tools that have come up, right? GPT-0, for instance, trying to measure perplexity in terms of determining what is AI generated. And I think at the heart of kind of like the issue of these tools that are being used to kind of like determine or identify something that's AI generated is that they're all based on probability. And at the core of it, the logic is the measurement of perplexity that is in terms of syntactic structures that are not predictable. Because if generative AI is based on statistical models where you have predictable ways of constructing a sentence, they're saying, well, it's human if it is something that you can't predict, and therefore the level of perplexity. And so two things to consider here is that one, what these tools generate is only a question of probability. And because of the logic behind how it identifies something that's AI generated, it can never be a definitive way of identifying that a student has submitted something that's from AI. The second also issue that people have been seeing is that because of that logic of perplexity as a way to measure kind of like what's AI generated, is that it has disadvantaged certain learners, especially those, for instance, who speak English as an additional language and who rely on certain patterns or formulas and able to create kind of like text that then sound predictable enough to be like AI generated text, right? So there is that issue that we're looking at here. And so for me, the question then is, if the tool is out there, the reason it's very difficult to track is that it's done in isolation outside the classroom also, and students are getting very individual results, right? So the question then is, if we are able to bring it into the classroom, engage in conversation about these tools, does it open up a space where they are able to think about more critically kind of how to use these tools in ways that are generative, are productive, but at the same time ethical and does contribute to their learning?
I just wanted to jump off, Ron. Thank you so much for eloquently stating all of that. I think, exactly what you said. Every time that I talk about AI use with instructors or teachers, professors, all kinds, it's this piece of cheating and what they need to do. And now folks are moving to that AI resistant assignment, pen and paper, no electronics. I've been trying to propose exactly what Ron has been talking here to us. Like, what if you gave, as teachers, we often give options. What if you gave an option, you write your own essay, or you prompt an AI to generate the essay, and you critically analyze each paragraph, each argument that it's making, because as the instructor, if I'm trying to assess critical thinking skills, whether they can manage the format of a formal essay versus they're doing the same skills. So just exploring ways that we could creatively create these spaces where if you choose to try to learn it, here is a way. I am assessing critical thinking skills, and it removes the barrier of the format of the essay. And not everyone in their life is going to be writing a formal argumentative essay or whatever it has to be. So I wonder if there's ways that we could build it in so that it allows the freedom to explore in a safe and limited way. It would also allow students of all ages to test these tools, to have parameters with which to use them. And they would develop that critical eye of, whoa, this is problematic. This is not great. I don't know. I've suggested it a few times, and I've run it with a class that I taught in the fall, and it was really great. Those who wanted to try it did, and those who didn't. But they really started to develop a discerning eye, and they realized, you know what, for this, I would use an AI. But for this other task, I wouldn't, because I didn't like the output. Like critically, I have more skill than what I saw produced. And so, yeah, I wonder if there's room for more of that in education. Like I had mentioned, I loved Nick's question about the cheating, just because in the lower years, the first and second years, they have mass exams. There's like hundreds of people writing these exams on the computer, and they're suspecting AI use. So now they have to have individual one-on-one interviews with them about their answers produced. If they cannot adequately explain it, the student must come back and rewrite on paper in front of the professor. But they're saying it is so time-consuming to be able to do this with hundreds of students. And now their prompting skills are getting really great because you can give it a level. You can give it, add errors, do all this. So I think, what if we developed tools that would require an option to be built in? Maybe that's not possible for a big exam in first or second year science, or for what your purpose is, but just looking to open up. Yeah, Danny.
I think we could just keep riffing this whole time, but I also want to address the question that came up, Jennifer's question here about productive. She asked in chat, can the panelists speak to the concept of productive struggle where inefficient work helps us learn? So I want to address that, but I also want to address something else as a meta narrative here that I'm starting to see, which is going back to that article of Collins and Halverson. One of the things they argue is that we have to re-examine everything about schooling. So the assumption of efficiency being an important value, for instance, the assumption, like if you look at arts education, there's some writing about how the wandering about is part of it. The reverie is also part of learning. The errors, the wrong paths are also part of the learning. And I think that that's one piece that it relates to the inefficient work that Jennifer is talking about. But then the other thing is, I do think, and this is particularly true in music learning, but in sports and anything, that there is this need to push against the limit of what you can do and to push beyond it. And there is a need for unmediated experiences that have the flaws. And we crave that. We go to live performance because we want to see the musician actually play it. Functionally, you don't want to see how they, you don't want to see what's in the sausage when you hear Taylor Swift, because they're pulling everything apart and putting it back together again, so it comes out so perfect. And it used to drive me crazy when I would watch Glee, because everything that came out didn't sound like a school choir at all, right? It was compressed and vocoded and all these kinds of things. So what happens though is that the general the population start to expect that as an expectation, that perfection, right? And they lose that tolerance for the humanity of it. And I do think that this idea, it's very important for students to hit the wall of their learning and to push through it. And I think that, Mike, you're pointing to some ways in which we can teach to use it, which is, and I see there's some question about this grunt work, whether it might be a derogatory term, but the idea that this, the methodical work, the mundane work, that type of work, some of it, there's different types of personalities, there's different types of people out there. And I just want to, Sonya, you said some people might not have to write an essay or do this. And I'm a child of the Enlightenment, and that I really came out of this idea about reason and rationality. And an essay means to test your thoughts, and the value of that kind of didactic, and I criticize this type of writing, but that kind of expository prose is it does train the mind in a way which other forms don't. Now, I would argue that poetic thinking also trains the mind in a way that other types don't. And I think that there's other ways. As a writer, we engage in different types of writing, right, to use different parts of our expression ability. But I do think that as we look at this, giving AI these jobs of ours, right, we have to be somewhat choosy about it, and we have to teach our children well that hard work is a good thing, that not everything feels good all the time, that it doesn't all come out shiny and full of cotton candy and a well-produced song right away. Sometimes people sing off key, and that's a beautiful thing. And we have to somehow bring, and when, this question of the humanity in it, this is just a shovel we have here, and we can't give control of our world over to a shovel. We need to actually decide where we want to dig. So I just wanted to address that.
Maybe I can speak to the productivity part of it, and maybe I wasn't clear, but I'll use the example of my summative assignment that I had to give to my students finishing a novel study last week. In terms of UDL, UBC is teaching us these days to make sure there's options for everybody. So I had 7 different options for students to respond to this novel that we'd spend 5 weeks reading. They could do an essay, they could do a podcast, they could do a story map, they could do a magazine, they could interview an elder, and then talk to that elder, and then connect that to the themes of resilience, survival. And then they could combine those if they wanted to, and they could work solo or partner. So I gave them all the options so they could do it. And in the end, when I looked at it, I had all of them fill out forms saying this is what I'd like to do. In the end, I was left with 28 different kinds of assignments that I now had to assess. So I could sit down and create 28 different rubrics to show them 28 different times, or I can use the core competencies, the curricular competencies, and use ChatGPT to create 28 different rubrics, which is that, and then I did. Check those over, make sure they're okay, pass one of those to each group of students, and then they can do the work. So they're still struggling. They're still like succeeding and failing, but I'm not spending my time coming up with 28 individualized rubrics for each and every pair that wants to do it. So as much as we're taught in this program that we're currently in to like give tons and tons of options, the question of assessment and fairness always comes into this. And the issue is that if we're spending so much time on this whole assessment piece, which is, don't get me wrong, super important, then I worry and kind of understand why teachers would burn out. If we're giving adaptations for the people who need it, and we're helping the students with IEPs, and we're giving people the ways to reflect if they want to, like orally, visually, with writing, however they want to, a lot of work. And if the only fair way is to really give them the criteria and the rubric in advance, this is one of the tools that I was able to use to just lighten that load for myself. But in terms of the students, none of those options involved them using AI. This was all for the teachers to remove the fiddly little bits that kind of drive people crazy. And I'm sure, like, I'm a parent, I'm sure those of us who have kids and have seen the report card comments and said like, huh, these seem like they're generated. They are. After going through this for the month of April, watching all of these teachers with 20, 25 years experience doing it, each and every person was just like, okay, this is the people would do a strength, a stretch, the strategy, throw that into AI, dumps out into an Excel sheet, straight into my ed, and those are the comments, right? Have they always been doing that? Not with ChatGPT, but I might argue that it's always been done in such a way that we've always been kind of writing to an algorithm anyway when it comes to that. I remember being in high school up north and getting, Mike is great in class, he/she should do more homework. And I'd be like, you can't even remove the she, like, this, but it was just like a matter of laziness and a matter of just getting through as much as possible. So that's the argument I'm trying and perhaps maybe failing to make, but is that there are the fiddly little bits that teachers should be able to do. But I really do expect the students to put their heads down and work hard. And I didn't allow any AI in any of my classes throughout the 10 weeks that I was on practicum.
Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
Yes, I wanted to jump in with the interesting conversation that's happening in the chat as well, right? I think the question really is centered on, well, what does it mean when this tool can generate something that appears to be creative? And that you know, if you wanted to come up with something punk, etc., and this is what we're talking about on the chat. But I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that you know, because if we know that the stuff that's produced by these tools can only be stereotypical, right? Because they are based on kind of what it sees as patterns in the data, then really the way to be able to enable creativity comes with criticality, right? We never, I think Danny also mentioned that you cannot separate creativity from criticality, and that really does mean being able to even take a look at generated text, generated music, generated images, and to apply a critical eye and say, well, what are the ideas here that are reproduced? What does that say about kind of like what we know about the world as it is? And what is it that I can do to reframe that, to re-envision that? Then again, it goes back to the idea that the tool is there not to come up with something creative, but it allows to free up cognitive load. It allows you to be able to look at certain texts to then be able to examine it and understand how it reflects existing ways of thinking, ideologies, patterns, and therefore be able to subvert that into something more creative and individual.
And you use the word subvert, which is an excellent word, right? Because I've learned this from you today, Ron. Thank you, because it can only create something that's stereotypical. So when I say it can emulate punk, it can emulate the stereotypes of punk, right? But the other thing it doesn't emulate is the reason why why any type of music works is the community that forms around it, right? So it is the community around the music. Whereas when we mediatize it and we put it in these abstract forms, it's very odd what's happened with that, because in many ways it's created these communities, but they're not geographically based anymore, right? So they're based around, like, I play an instrument called a dobro, a resonator guitar, and I take guitar lessons with a guy who lives in Michigan. And there's a community he has online and all these things. So it's this whole new way of doing this music learning where I don't have that solid face-to-face community. I crave it and I miss it. And I fear, and this is where the teachers comes in. What do teachers do? Teachers, our job is to, in some ways, show kids things that they're not going to encounter on their own, right? Like the value of community music making, like the value of, and if you talk to kids about their experience making music in school, it's the bus trips, it's the festivals, it's the community around it, not just the music itself. And I think that we have to remember, and that's another human element here, is that this can become very alienating, right? And put us alone in our rooms looking at our computers, but it has to at some point end in a human connection, I would think. I would hope. Maybe the AI doesn't agree. So,
I just want to say I agree 100%, Danny. For me, creativity lies not in human collaboration with Gen AI, but in human collaboration through Gen AI, right? And that's where we're able to look at it in terms of more ethical and agentive ways of using these tools. And that's why I think I mentioned earlier about how it's such the way it's used now, it's still very much individualized, right? I retreat to my own room and I look at it and I play around with it, generate text. But to be able to bring that back into a community where you collaboratively think about kind of like these products, then you're able to find more creative ways of using it, right? And that's where I think it's key for us for educators, right, for it not to become taboo so that people don't talk about it, right? Because really how you're able to examine critical eye is if you're able to see patterns in the ways people use it as a whole.
I'm just going to backtrack a touch because I think that Dustin posed a question and we haven't gotten to all three of the questions quite yet. And Mike, I know you mentioned that you haven't integrated AI in your practicum, which I thought was a really fascinating angle to maybe look at this question. So Dustin wrote, though it's early days for AI, it can already summarize, translate, and now perform some reasoning while it searches and quotes the web. Can kids using AI as a tool then be more quickly accelerated into a new topic? If creativity is exploration, a tool that allows you to explore your thoughts and questions privately, perhaps, at the guidance of a teacher seems like it could be useful. So how do teachers get kids to see this as a learning accelerant versus a way to skip the work?
I think a fantastic question. Thank you, Dustin, for that. I think that absolutely can be used with guardrails, and part of the work I'm doing here in the LDDI department is to sort of create lesson plans around that. And I mean, if we're using it that way, I don't see how it's that different from Google, or more of like a guided Google, where there are some GPTs that are custom built just for explaining difficult concepts. And so I was using it the other day just to teach myself about space-time, because I realized I have no knowledge of what that actually means. And so it was asking me questions along the way and guiding me towards an answer. So I think with something like that, I think it absolutely can be an accelerant. And I think with something like that, they're not necessarily like generating stuff. So as a English teacher, new, but as an ELL teacher with experience teaching adults for so long, as long as the reflection comes from them afterwards and they're generating their own thoughts and ideas, that would be, to me, where I can see proof of learning. So if I'm setting them up with a ChatGPT prompt to go out and find out 3 interesting things about Indigenous community in which they live, and then they use that to try to start their research, and then maybe from there they go for authentic sources, as long as afterwards they're producing content that there's their own, I have zero problem with that. And if they were to, for example, as an end of it, get bullet points from any kind of Gen AI, and then use those bullet points to then reflect either in a presentation style, orally, or by writing it out, I personally don't see any issue with that, because again, we're using this as one of many tools to kind of help their creativity come out. And as a English teacher, the curricular competencies are there, and it says very explicitly they have to be able to organize their thoughts and take their idea and summarize it clearly and then produce that work. And so I personally don't see an issue with that, and I think that it would be a really good accelerant. And honestly, with the state of the web today, where you're searching through pages after pages after pages of like nonsense advertisements or generated content already, or even sometimes the Google Gemini summaries that come when you do these queries are absolute hot garbage. I feel like this might be a way to kind of circumvent that, or at least have a starting point. That would be my idea, and I think it's a really good idea.
Thanks, Mike. Does Ron, Sonya, Danny, do you have any comments to follow?
I think, Mike, what you touched on there is really important, in that when we look at interacting with AI tools, we have to look at it in the larger ecosystem of what's available out there in terms of technology, right? And that's why in my work, like, I hesitate to just narrow it down to critical AI literacy. I talk about critical digital literacy because I want students to remember that when they find answers, kind of like using the tools, they need to triangulate. They need to go out, engage in lateral reading, go out to other web sources, go talk to people, right? And that's a way to make sure that they are engaging with these generated texts in a way that does stimulate more critical thinking, right? And so how we impress on them that they need to think about kind of like the way these tools generate output also comes with understanding the very nature of these tools, how these tools work, right? I think that's something, because it's easy for teachers to say, oh, if you just copy from that, it's cheating or whatever. But we need to kind of like complexify the conversation a little further, right? By talking about, well, see, this is the nature of how it works, and this is what you'll expect from what is produced, right? Because that then also raises, I know someone was asking about the ethical component, about what it means that these texts come from other people's existing texts, right? Especially when we talk about art. And when it comes to even talking about more environmental implications of the use of these tools as well, right? As we know, they say a string of props uses up 16 ounces of water, right? When it comes to cooling down these huge data centers to power these tools, we need to really think about kind of like expanding the idea of what it means to really examine these tools critically by taking a look at the whole ecosystem in which we use these tools.
I guess I'll just speak to a little bit to this notion of Dustin's question was talking about creativity. If creativity is exploration, a tool that allows you to explore your thoughts and questions privately, perhaps at the guidance of a teacher, seems like it could be useful. I think that we must always remember the teacher, right? And I know that AI, I think there's people up there in some glass enclosed rooms who are dreaming of a day when the AI is our teachers, and everyone has a personal tutor and like a virtual girlfriend, that, and I think that, they dream of this. And I think we have to remember that in many ways this is also fueled by capitalism and and money making. And there's lots of questions as to who owns this material, who owns these prompts, who owns this stuff. Generally, we've talked quite a bit about this. If you use it to spell check, does ChatGPT own it? And I just also want to speak a little bit to one of the things that's happened to music since we started recording music, is that music has become an object, a commodity we sell, right? A commodity that gets traded as opposed to an activity we engage in. And one of the things that's coming out of sort of some of the music education philosophy I like is the idea that music is present when when there's a human making music. The music doesn't exist just on its own. It's just zeros and ones in my iPad. It's not anything until I hear it and turn it into that meaning and make meaning of it. And so whereas my wife has a joke, people talk about artificial intelligence, and what she's concerned about is genuine stupidity. And I think that it's important for us to remember that we have to fight against genuine stupidity. And that's where teachers come in. And we can't, and the AI can, I think that what we're walking around here is this going to make us stupid, right? And I'm reminded of when GarageBand came in, and I've written something about this before. There was a lot of people saying this is not music. This is not making music. Dragging and dropping loops and producing tunes and remixing is not making music. I'm sure the first time somebody saw somebody with 2 LPs and scratching them together and creating early hip hop, there were people who said that's not music, but once again, it is the creative spirit that's going to help us. And the question in my mind is, okay, I can teach somebody to use GarageBand who has no musical training. But if I use that as a tool to teach them what they're doing, hey, you know why those 2 loops don't work well together? Let me show you why, right? Let me show you what this does and this does. This is in 3/4, this is in 4/4. Can you hear the difference, right? I wouldn't use those terms. But the thing is that being able to get that discerning listening in the same way that when you read something, we have to be discerning about it. And I think that's where a teacher comes in. And so, maybe AI can replace me as a professor someday. That might be nice, I guess. I could sit around and do other stuff, but I don't think it would be as good. I think we have to teach people how to use the hammers. We can't just give them the hammers and say, go pound something.
There's this one scholar that talks about this precarious echo chamber of artificiality, right? Because what's happening really is if we don't get to check and modify these things that are created, it really creates a self-referential loop, right? Where models are increasingly trained on their own prior outputs, right? So it's just regurgitating everything. So it takes a human to be able to change.
And then you get things like, I was hearing this too, where Twitter will be full of sort of fake information, fake news, and then the AI goes into it and gathers it up, the fake news, and says, okay, well, this is the news, right? Because it sees that it's been published as news, and so this discernment factor, it's a problem. It's a problem, and I really don't know who owns it. That also is a problem. Like when I'm playing with the Suno thing, I haven't signed up or anything like that. I don't know how they're making money off it. I don't know who's making money off it. It's all a bit perplexing to me. So just to add some concern to the mix.
Sonya, I noticed you turned off your mic for a moment. Yeah, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I had to move rooms because someone is in our thing and someone was using the shredder. But no, it's like, just learning that critical piece. And I think it is so important to teach people about it, because they are coming up to university, they are becoming teachers, and they just don't know. They don't know, they don't understand what it can do. Talking to some educators who are using it to assess their students' writing, like just taking the writing without consent, putting it in, didn't realize that was unethical because you don't have permission. Indigenous data sovereignty, looking up that. But then, I've been working with a lot of groups up north, and doing tutorials. And these folks want to learn about it because people assume they don't need it. But it's everywhere. And so it's like, I don't know. I want them to learn about it and analyze it because it is here, and being discerning, being critical, and then, selecting it with thought behind when and if you decide to use it, and understanding that your creativity and the way that your intellectual property is used and how you're going to develop. And so it's very intriguing.
But Sonya, isn't it odd that we're all saying it's here, we have to deal with it?
Yeah.
Isn't it just sort of odd how that's the narrative, right? There's no options here. There's no questions. Ron, you're nodding your head. You seem to know, you've
I
studied some of
agree
this.
completely. I think we always think that innovation and technology is kind of something that always spells progress, right? And that we are just subject to it and we just consent to it. But really, in the end, we make choices, right, in terms of how we can use these tools, right? Sonia, you mentioned kind of like working with indigenous communities, right? Like, and it's true, I agree, right? Like when you submit something on these tools, right, you need to make sure that you're not violating kind of like kind of copyright, right? At the same time, just to provide some kind of like positive, on a positive note, we see how these tools can really help with language revitalization, right? Because it is through these tools that if before, right, it would take such a huge corpora to be able to come up with tools that are able to engage in, kind of like language, minority, what would be considered minority or endangered languages, that these tools are helping with that precisely because it's designed in a way to be able to take existing data and use it in ways that will enable kind of like wider thinking about these languages.
No, it's such a great point. And some of the indigenous communities I've been working with up north, they just want to see what the possibilities could be for their language. It's exactly what you're mentioning. And I know I'll have to find the site and post it, but there is a site that is cataloging indigenous languages. It's a big project with AI tools to be able to create it. Because one of the features that I was trying to show them was the captioning for their practicum in PowerPoint, where it will live caption a PowerPoint presentation. Not on our staff and faculty accounts here at UBC, but the student accounts and, personal devices. But they made a comment of like, well, I bet they don't have this language, and it was their indigenous language. It is not obviously built in. But then we started discussing the idea of what if your community, your nation felt comfortable adding this knowledge into the AI so that it could help potentially develop these translators of your language from your community. So they were very intrigued with like how it could be worked. And yeah, it's such an intriguing piece.
Meta has just come up with a platform called Seamless M40, where rather than just basing it on written text, which is usually what's used for natural language processing, is that for languages that are more spoken than written and would not have a huge written corpus, that they're able to translate from oral to oral. They're
Wow.
skip the written, and I think that could be very powerful,
Yeah.
particularly for languages that are more spoken.
Yeah. And I just add, to end on a positive note, it's incredible. Like it's incredible what humans have done here. This machine we have built is astonishing. The fact that I can punch this in and it can produce this music, that that we can do the work that you're showing us, Mike. It is an astounding statement to human ingenuity and cleverness. The question is our cleverness good for us? And that's what we're trying to figure out. But it is a remarkable feat of collective effort to create this over generations and generations.
And just to piggyback off of that, and perhaps end on a even more positive note, I'm old enough to remember the early days of the internet when people said that it was going to kill teaching, and then Wikipedia was going to kill teaching, and then YouTube was going to kill teaching, and then Khan Academy is going to kill teaching, and now this is the next thing that's going to kill teaching, and yet our entire discussion is around this. And for my own kids who've grown up in the VSB, they do tons of work on researching Google for their inquiry projects. And the teachers starting at the grade 4 or 5 level will teach them how to evaluate sources, how to make sure something is good and not good. And this is really important. So the education piece is what's made the difference. And I could argue that we've all been writing to these algorithms since the days of search engine optimization, which is why you go to get a recipe of cornbread and you have to sift through 300, 400 words about the person's story and their grandmother, because this is optimized for the search engine so they can show up first. We're not getting the best cornbread recipe. We're getting the one that has the best algorithmically written text. So we've all been doing this, but we're all aware that the number one result in Google might not be the best, that we should maybe look for 2 or 3. And we're all aware that we need to evaluate the sources. So to me, it always comes back to the education piece, where we're teaching kids from probably high school level, if not earlier, when Gen A spits something out, it might not be factual, and you have to do a bit more due diligence to see if it is, and you can't just trust it as your own. And I know we're bumping up to the end of our session here, but I spent part of my morning here, even though practicum ended on Friday, dealing with a student who plagiarized his activity, his summative activity, using quotes from the novel that were completely and totally fabricated. So he's redoing it. He's learned that lesson, but I've had to sit down with him and his parents on the phone and say, this quote from the book, it doesn't exist. And they said, well, I swear it is. And I'm like, this is a PDF version and it's not in there. And then the kid's going, oh. So he's learned a lesson now, grade 10, which I hope will carry with him to grade 11 and 12 and off into his university days, because I'm sure he'll end up there. But it's one of those things where I think he's learned that lesson, and in a non-punitive way, he'll be able to redo this activity and understand that, like, when it spits something out with confidence, that confidence might not be the case. And I think this is where all of us collectively as educators, in both in the chat and here speaking today, this is our responsibility, is to show them that this is not going away. It is incredibly powerful, but just like the internet, there's things that we need to watch, and there's guardrails we need to put up when we're evaluating these sources. So
thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge Hazuki's question. I think naturally we got to most of her questions, but Hazuki, I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions. And thank you to all of our 4 panelists. That brings us to 4:30 on the dot. So yes, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for our session today. But we'd like to extend our sincere gratitude to our 4 incredible panelists, Dr. Darvin, Dr. Bakan, Dr. Woloshen, and Mr. Elkoussy, for your invaluable time and contributions on how to leverage AI and innovate and personalize education, while also addressing some of these very critical and ethical concerns. And we'd also like to thank everyone here for joining the conversation and for posing such thought-provoking questions, experiences, and comments. So thank you once again for joining us, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day.